Morning, everyone. Or should I say good morning, class? My name is Paul Orhovic, and I'm really pleased to be here. A little something, 30-second version about me. I worked in higher education for over 40 years and then retired about 5 years ago. I like to tell colleagues I went to college in 1966 and never left. And I can't think of a better career than seeing young people and sometimes not so young people come through the doors every day to keep me young. What I'm going to be doing today and this morning and this afternoon is talking about strategic planning, in particular strategic planning in enrollment management. And so there's two sessions, one now and then one this afternoon, and they really do connect. In the first session, we're going to talk about how we tie enrollment management to strategic planning and why it's important to tie that together. And then really talk about preparing to do a strategic plan. And in effect, laying the groundwork to this afternoon session in which we're going to get into the details of completing a market plan and hopefully walking out the door with a sample. And this afternoon, I will actually give you a sample of a strategic plan rather than just talking about it. I'll give you a sample that you're going to walk out the door with, and whether you use that strategic plan or use it to just get your own ideas going, that would be great. What I really want to do, though, is start a conversation to give you a sense of what real enrollment management is all about. I'd like to start out with 4 definitions of enrollment management. And I picked these out because they really show the change in enrollment management. Enrollment management really started in the early 80s, maybe late 70s, but really the early 80s. And these 4 definitions show the progress or change in enrollment management through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now into the 2000s. This first one, enrollment management implies an assertive approach to ensuring the steady supply of qualified students required to maintain institutional vitality. When you look at that, basically, it's recruitment. It's recruitment. And when you think about where we were in the early 80s, the baby boomers were all out. There's a decrease in the number of 18-year-olds, which all of a sudden created anxiety on college campuses because enrollments were going down. Enrollments were going down. Then during that time, there was the expansion of the community colleges and the expansion of proprietary schools. And what this really meant was admissions officers in the 60s basically stayed in their office or maybe visited some high schools. They weren't recruiters. They were admissions officers. They waited for the applications to come in. There were plenty of them, and then it was thumbs up or thumbs down. That was their job. And so when we got into the early 80s and all of a sudden there were fewer students, the whole job changed. There was a time, well, maybe it's still true a little bit, where the term marketing was a no-no. You never mentioned marketing in front of faculty members because that's not us. We're here, we have great programs, and students will overwhelm us. Well, that stopped in the 80s. And a lot of admissions directors at that time couldn't make that transition. They couldn't become recruiters. It was very difficult for them. But that's when enrollment management really started. The second definition is by a gentleman named Don Hostler. Dr. Hostler is probably the most prolific writer there is in enrollment management. And those of you who are vice presidents or deans of enrollment management have probably read a lot of his stuff. But he says then, effective enrollment management not only requires the marketing of the institution and the selection of students, but also involves more broadly based and all-encompassing activities. In effect, it's more than just recruitment. So all of a sudden, now we're starting to see that little bit of a change. Then the gentleman who I have the most admiration for is Jack McGuire out of Boston College, and many consider him the what do I say, the godfather of enrollment management. He really is the person who started it. And what's interesting is, he wasn't an admissions director. He wasn't a financial aid director. He was a faculty member. He was a physics teacher, And he said there's got to be more data-driven ways of thinking about enrollment management. And you see in his definition, he says that enrollment management has emerged as a comprehensive and integrated, that word integrated is very important, approach to related functions to enhance. In other words, it's much more than the admissions office. Much more than the admissions office. It's financial aid, it's registrar, it's a faculty, it's academic. You name the office, they should all in some ways be involved with it. He saw enrollment management as a data-driven activity. And some of you know that he then went on to start his own enrollment management institute, which he ran for, I think, 6 or 7 years, and it just got to be too much. I actually attended that and appreciated that. But then he started his own business and made a lot of money. Then my favorite, by Orahovic and Ingold. Ingold is a colleague of mine. True enrollment management is a concept and a process. It gets various divisions working synergistically to improve services and allow the strategic management of enrollment on college campuses. It's a concept, but it's also a process. It's a process. It's not an organizational chart. As a matter of fact, organizational structures become transparent. In other words, students don't say, oh, I'm applying to the admissions office at XYZ college. No, they're applying to XYZ. Do you ever notice how sometimes you have a financial aid office and a bursar office? And I grew out of financial aid, so I can poke fun out of myself. But a financial aid and a bursar office. Student goes to the financial aid office and says, oh, no, you got to go check that out with the bursar. Okay, goes over to the bursar office, oh, we don't know anything about that. You got to go back to the financial aid. It drives students crazy. It drives them crazy because they applied to a university or a college. They didn't apply to this office or that office. They see it all together. They don't understand why the bursar over here doesn't know what the financial aid office did. Why don't they know? They work at the same place. So it's a concept and a process. Organizational structures become transparent. Divisions work synergistically. You're going to hear me say that over and over. As a matter of fact, after I retired, and a lot of my former students, because I taught in the graduate program, a lot of my students would come and say, oh, there's Mr. Synergy, because they knew that's all I was going to talk about. Because we can't think about one office. We got to think synergistically. Enrollment management is everyone's job, not just the vice president for enrollment management. I put together some thoughts for you. And we'll see how much you agree or disagree with some of these. Enrollment management is not an alternative term for recruitment. See, a lot of schools, they just changed the title. You had a director of admissions. Well, enrollment's down. Let's have a dean of admissions. Like that was going to change something because somebody got a different title. Well, let's make it dean of enrollment. But they were still an admissions officer. And then vice president for enrollment. Well, if you don't change your culture or how you perceive enrollment management, you still basically have a director of admission. And there's nothing wrong. You got to have a director of admission or somebody focusing on that. But it's not an alternative term just for, it's not an organizational chart. I can't tell you how many times, and I still get calls even though I'm retired, a college president will find out where I'm at and they'll call me and they say, hey, we're thinking of going into enrollment management. Can you send me a copy of your organizational chart? And my response every time was no. Because enrollment management isn't an organizational chart. It's not an organizational, it's a culture. It's a culture. And when a college president, those of you in the room, I'm sending this message, when you change the organization, human nature is to see everybody as a winner or a loser. Either they won in the reorganization or they lost in the reorganization. And that's why I think it's got to go beyond an organizational change. Now, an organizational change may be needed for a lot of reasons, but it's not an organizational chart. The problem with the winners and the losers. That's human nature. Establish a campus-wide culture of enrollment management. That's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight because, let's just say faculty, for example, recruiting students, that's the job of the Office of Admissions or the Enrollment Management Vice President. That's their job. No, it's everyone's job. Everyone plays a role in recruiting a student. You know, that student who comes on campus and they're looking around, gosh, I wonder where the admission office is. Does everybody at your campus stop that student because they look obviously lost and say, hey, how can I help you? What are you looking for? And do they show them where it's at? I like to cite my example of the Japan. One thing about being vice president, I got to go wherever I wanted to go to recruit students. So I loved going to Tokyo because we had a lot of international students. And I had two experiences, not one, but two experiences in Tokyo where I left the hotel, and one I had to walk about 4 blocks to get to this scholarship organization because I wanted to go and find out what they were all about. And I had the address. I speak no Japanese, and most of the Japanese who I was running into, other than at the hotel, didn't speak English. So I'm looking at my card, and I'm looking a little lost, and this gentleman is walking by at a fast pace, and he stops. He sees that I'm a little lost, and I have the address on here, and you know, we sort of hand communicate, and he says, you know, and he says, he walks me the 4 blocks. We get there. He doesn't just stop there. We get in the elevator. We go up to the 23rd floor. He walks me into the office, and he goes like this. I mean, that's a culture. That's a culture of, hey, I see somebody who's a little lost, and I'm going to help them. I had the same thing happen with a police officer in Tokyo. They have what they call chomes. And trust me, anyone from the United States will never understand their address system. It's not, you know, north, east, south, and you count the addresses and, you know, it's either going higher or lower. No, they have chomes. They're blocks. And again, I have this thing, I'm looking lost, and he says, he looks at it, and he points this way. You walk over here, and then he looks at this. No, he was having trouble finding this address. But again, after 15 minutes, he walked me to the place. Ever since that happened to me, anytime I saw someone lost on my campus, even if I was rushing off to a meeting, I didn't just point them. If I could find any time at all, I walked them there. Think about the message that leaves with a prospective student or prospective family. This place really cares. Really important. I like to tell people I had 2 favorite directors on campus who I considered enrollment managers. It isn't just the vice president for enrollment management. Anyone can be an enrollment manager. One was the director of the wellness center. Yes, the director of the wellness center. We had a new wellness center built, and he would be out there every day in between meetings at the front door, and he could spot and greet them. He would take them. This is our wellness center. Here's how we fit into the university. Here's why we call it a wellness center and not something else. And he was really good. Another one was director of food service. Now, why on earth would a director of food service ever be an enrollment manager? I used to have a group called a Friday Enrollments Group. And we met every Friday, no agenda. There was only 2 things we did. One, we spent a half an hour sharing data, and if there was any time left over, we just talked about what was happening in our offices that coming week. And the one that really paid dividends was when we had the director of housing, the director of food service, and all kinds of different people, including, you know, the traditional suspects. We're going around the room, and I'll never forget, the bursar says, well, we've earmarked August 1st to send out the bills. And the director of housing says, well, we're going to have our charges over to your office by July 15. And financial aid said, we're going to have as much of the financial aid that we can conceivably have. We're going to have that on there by August 1st to be sure. Get to the food service director, and she says, oh, we haven't started putting any of that data in the system yet. School doesn't start until September 15th. We're thinking of doing it about August 15th. And you saw all these heads just look at her like, do you not understand that if the bill goes out August 1st and you're not putting the charges on there until August 15th, parents are going to get this bill, the financial aid is going to be there, they're going to be pleased with the bottom line probably, and they're going to pay it. And then you're going to put the charges on and we're going to send them another bill? Not good for enrollment management. And so even the director of food service was learning. I knew I really made it at one of our meetings after we had this going for about 3-4 years. The bursar, as we're going around, he says, hey, I have a favor of everyone. I have a draft of a brochure we've put together for prospective parents about the billing process, you know, what you need to do, the timelines, all this. And he passes around, he says, I wanted you all to look at it because I know we're going to have all the information in there, but you need to help me make sure it's going to help with recruitment. You could have picked me up off the floor because, you know, my traditional image of the bursar was somebody who's pretty rigid, who just wants to make sure the bill's paid and all. But he had learned just from attending these meetings that he was an enrollment manager. And as much as he had to collect the money, he had to do a brochure to tell people how to do this, he was already thinking about how he could develop that brochure and help it. This is this idea of developing a culture on campus is a critical component to tying into the strategic enrollment planning process because you want to get more people involved. I'm oftentimes asked, well, how do you get everyone involved? Well, it doesn't happen overnight. It starts out with staff meetings. Obviously, those of you who are vice presidents of enrollment management, you have staff meetings, and if you have admissions, financial aid, whatever you have, you're going to meet, I assume, on a weekly basis. Well, we started this weekly Friday meeting, and that paid great dividends. We also did a monthly assessment of the strategic enrollment plan, the thing that we're going to build this afternoon. We made sure that at least once a month, we pulled people together and say, okay, where are we with our plan? This is what we said we were going to do. This is how we're going to measure it. How are we doing? What's coming up this next month that we should be doing? And we did that on a monthly basis. I used to have an annual enrollment management presentation because at my institution anyway, faculty were always all over me. Why can't we get better students? Why can't we, you know, the usual. And instead of backing away and complaining about it, I started to draw them in to my strategic plan and to everything we were doing. And so what I did was once a year I announced to the faculty and all administrators, I'm doing my annual enrollment presentation. We got a large classroom. We get somewhere around 200 people show up. And I called it 60 slides in 60 minutes. And it was nothing but data. It was data about what's happening with demographics, what's happening with our enrollment, what's happening with our ACT or SAT score or our grade point average, the makeup of the class, all kinds of things. And it was just hit, one slide after another. And I got them understanding, for us it was important to find new markets, and we were going out to Texas and California. My institution was in Florida, but we were going out to Texas and California. And I showed them how over the next 10 years, the number of high school graduates in those states was skyrocketing, and we wanted to be there taking advantage of that. So I got them to start thinking like an enrollment manager. So it's just one of the things we can do. Then obviously, we did the strategic enrollment plan. And one of the things I learned, sometimes the person you least suspect will have some serious input into a strategic plan, comes up with a brilliant idea. And so, yes, maybe the phone operator can be an enrollment manager. Yeah, maybe the data entry person, or the person who opens the mail, or this day, opens the emails and parcels them out. Maybe that person has something to really put forth with ideas. Now, were there crazy ideas that were thrown out there? Absolutely. But you know, it just takes 1, 2, or 3 great ideas in a given year to really boost up your enrollment, help your recruitment, and make everything work. And so as we're doing the strategic enrollment planning process, I would certainly include all my directors, you know, and the key people in my operation, key people outside my operation, I'd bring them in. But I also open these workshops to anybody in my division, anybody who wanted to attend, to go through, and I would put them through exercises. I'd have these 3x5 cards, you know, okay, we want to talk about how we can improve the yield between the point where we get an application and the student completes the application, you know, that part of the funnel. And I'd give them 3x5 cards. I say, okay, everybody take 2 minutes. You fill out a 3x5 card with an idea. And I said, don't talk to your neighbors, come up with your ideas. And then we'd go around and everybody would say what they had on there. Again, some of the ideas were stupid, but I didn't say that. But on the other hand, some of the ideas were brilliant. And sometimes those came from person who opens the mail, person who answers the phone, not just the professional admissions, financial aid registrar team. Whenever I meet with I'm sorry, didn't mean to do that. Whenever I meet with my staff in these sessions, and when I would teach courses in enrollment management, I always said, don't just think about your area of responsibility. You know, if your area of responsibility is to recruit students from South Carolina, don't just think about how you recruit students from South Carolina. Start thinking about how I, as a vice president for enrollment management, think. What are some of the things that are important in terms of my vision? And hopefully I was able to tell them my vision. But also, start thinking like a president. Start thinking like a board of trustee member. Start thinking like a faculty senate member. So when you start trying to get outside your box and think about that, then that makes you a better person recruiting in South Carolina, because you know what the university's trying to become. Beyond even the mission, you know what that's like. And they would oftentimes say, well, I understand, but I'm going to be judged on how many students I get from South Carolina. I said, you're absolutely right. I mean, we understand that. But let me take that onus away a little bit and just say, I want you to do something beyond that. I said, you got to think outside the box, which brings me to a little exercise. Anybody have a magic marker? I didn't bring one. Anybody have a magic marker? I'll just draw. This doesn't take much. We're going to take 2 minutes. Draw a piece of paper. These 9 dots. Not too complicated. I know some of you might not be able to see. So just 3 dots, 3 dots, 3 dots. Draw out a little piece of paper. And I want you to put your pen on 1 dot and draw 4 contiguous lines that will touch all 9 dots. Okay? You can't lift your pen. You can't draw a line here and then draw a line. So it has to be contiguous. We'll walk in there. 4 people raise their hands saying they have it. Can you do that?
How many there?
4. And they have to go in order. So you go 1. So if you did one on a block, you know, 1 this way, 1 that way, 1 that way, that way. But you can't lift up your pen. 4 lines. Okay, how many do you have? Oh, you see? You say how? You can get this one. You can get this done. You're not in your head. You can't reach Let's see if I remember. It's been a while. One, two, three, four. Somebody said go outside the box, and you're absolutely correct. But we tend not to think that way. We tend not to think that way. We want to get outside the box. So think like a president. Get outside your box. Think about what is the president thinking of this vision of this college or this university, and how can I help meet that vision by what I'm doing? And if I'm the recruiter in South Carolina, how does it meet that vision? Enrollment managers need to understand the statistical side. If you don't like statistics, you at least have to understand the statistical side. I love statistics. Numbers are my friend. It starts with data collection. Obviously, you all do that. And the more data you collect, the better. It goes to research. Most enrollment managers don't do a lot of research. I don't understand that. And then they don't do any market research. Some do, some don't. But market research is critical. I like to think of research as looking backwards. What happened? What happened? Market research tries to look forward and answers the question, what will happen? And you need to think both ways. You need to have that background there. The next one was market testing. I used to market test, my staff used to market test all the time. And most enrollment managers don't. If you're doing market testing, you're in the 0.1%. And what do I mean by market testing? Let me give you an example. My admissions director came up with this one when he first joined us. We used to send out a fancy, glossy, I don't know if it was 32 pages probably, prospectus to all our prospects. You can imagine how expensive that was. And we were just reaching a point where it's too expensive. And he came in, he says, it's not only too expensive, but I'm not sure you're getting your biggest bang for your buck. And so we set up a test. We took half our prospect pool. We took a third of our prospect pool, and we sent them the prospectus. And we measured the response rate, and we got about a 10% response rate, maybe 12. We decided to put a twofold or threefold brochure, a lot less expensive, and we sent that out to a third of our prospect pool. And they responded 10 to 12%, asking for more information. Then, to the other third, we sent a personal letter. No prospectus, no trifold, personal letter. Dear Johnny, we understand you're interested in filmmaking. Filmmaking's in our School of Communication at the University of Blank. If you are interested in this, return this card and we'll go ahead and send you more information. It jumped to over 20% response. Now think about this. We were sending a 32-page, very expensive prospectus to all the prospects. Now we're going to send a letter. A lot less expensive to mail. When they wrote that back, guess what we sent them? We sent them a prospectus. But it was the second mailing, not the first. And it saved us a lot. That was a market test we did. We used to test dates. If we sent out a brochure, doesn't matter what brochure, but if we traditionally send it on March 1st, whatever it is, we then tried sending it on to a group on March 15th and maybe April 1st to see if there was any difference. Sending out different kinds of things. So we'd market test all the time. We would market test some financial aid offers. That gets a little tough. You start raising ethical questions in your mind. So we made a decision, if we were going to try to do that, no one would get less aid than they normally would have ever. But in a few cases, we tried bumping some scholarships just to see if we got a better response. And sure enough, we did. Sure enough, we did in some cases. So market testing, I think, is critical. We built predictive models. Most schools don't do that, but they might hire somebody. They might hire Jack McGuire's organization to do predictive models because they'll charge tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $100,000 to do that. And you know what you get at the end of the year? You get a good series of students that you should enhance aid or whatever. But then the next year, guess what? You got to hire them again because they didn't teach you how. They just did it for you, and they charge a lot of money. Pricing models, linear programming models, too. You're all familiar, I assume almost everyone here is familiar with the enrollment funnel. You notice I didn't call it an admission funnel or a recruitment funnel. It's an enrollment funnel because it ends with graduates. It doesn't end with a freshman class. You, as enrollment managers or work in a related field, I am sure understand this, but do your trustees understand it? Does your president truly understand it? Do your faculty understand it? Part of this building the culture is going out to different meetings, and maybe it's going to a faculty committee meeting sometime and just talking about this, and maybe showing some numbers. Matter of fact, can we hand this out? Again, you all, I am sure, have something similar, but do your faculty, do your trustees, does your president see this kind of data? If they're involved with enrollment management, they do. But maybe others don't, and you want to start building that culture on campus. And this is, again, very typical. You probably have something similar that you watch. And it's nothing but part of the funnel talking about where do we stand today compared to last year and maybe the year before. I always like looking at 3 years of data. But it also represents something you can have at the end of the year as a good benchmark of where your funnel was. Which leads me to the question, does everyone on the entire enrollment team understand and participate in the strategic enrollment market planning process? Or is it basically a group of 2 or 3 people in the admissions office doing this every year and designing it because they're the experts? Yes, if you're in admissions, you are the expert. But think outside that box, and maybe there are people outside of your close-knit group that can understand it and participate in it. I like enrollment managers who build this culture. They think about synergistic thinking. Oh, there's that word again. Synergistic thinking. In other words, can we all think together? Can we all think together? If we want to improve the ratio of those students admitted who actually attend, yield, if we want to change that, if we want to improve that, how can we all think together how we can make that happen? How can we synergistically plan for the next year and to think about what are the different strategies we can do to enhance that? What synergistic research can we do? What's the important research? What's the most important question we can ask ourselves this year? And if we can ask that question, then let's get our researchers trying to answer it. What's the most important strategy we're going to have? When you look down that admissions funnel, sometimes, thank you, sometimes, that's my message, I got to move a little faster. Sometimes, if you just tweak a small percent, if you tweak the ratio from prospect to inquiry by 0.5%, and all the other ratios stay the same, you'd be amazed at what comes down at the bottom. It's It's a major difference. So how can we change that? 1/4 or 1/2 of 1%. It sounds so little. How can we do that? And obviously, working synergistically all the way through. I'm reminded of the first time I went to a TQM conference. Oh, probably 20 years ago. TQM isn't even in anymore, but Total Quality Management. I walked away from there, and I'm not one who buys into these theories and stuff, and okay, you got to outline this, and although I'm going to show you an outline. But you know what I walked away from that meeting with? One thing. The presenter said you should always ask yourself, in your program, in your process, and what you're doing, what's stupid? What a novel thought. So I had a colleague, my registrar, who at least once a month in his staff meeting would ask his staff the question, what do we do that's stupid? And invariably, people came up with stuff. And it wasn't the directors or the deans who came up with it. It was somebody on the front lines. Why do we do this? My example was when I was a director of financial aid, I didn't get it from the TQM, but I had them, when I first got there, I had them outline the step-by-step when a student applies for financial aid. We do this, we get this, we send it over here, we do this, we do this. And I noticed that the Pell Grant, at that time there were Pell Grant applications, was touched 2 times in these 15 steps. I said, how can we, in the office, get away from 15 steps? Let's get to 5 steps. And why does the Pell Grant person touch this twice? That's stupid. That's stupid. When we talk about a strategic plan, and maybe you've already picked this up from me, the plan is important. There's no question about it, because it's a guide. It teaches everyone. I used to use it whenever we got a new employee in the division somewhere. First thing I did was give them a copy of our annual plan, which included a strategic plan. I said, hey, tonight, breeze through this. You don't have to read everything, but it'd tell you a lot about us. So again, even if the person was the phone receptionist in the financial aid office, I'd give that to them. Okay, I had to be careful. I couldn't tell them they had to do it at night. So I gave them a couple of hours to just go through it, because it helped them understand what our vision was. And if we did a good job of representing the president's or the institution's vision, then it works. So there's the plan, but there's also the process of developing the plan, getting everyone involved. So many times, plans are written and they're held in secret. My colleagues in the financial aid community used to be like that. Maybe some still are, but they used to hold stuff, and people would never question, because I don't know how they come with that number. Well, I don't know how they do that. I don't know why Johnny got $1,000 and Sally got $2,000. That's a mystery to me. Financial aid directors used to do that purposely, I think. Not consciously maybe, but subconsciously. That was their power, to hold that all in. Don't do it. Get everybody understanding it. Get everybody understanding. So they would keep things secret. You don't want to keep this secret. Now, again, you don't want to go to in my case, the Miami Herald and say, hey, no. But you want people to understand it and see it. And the other thing that sometimes happens is everybody goes through all these maturations of developing the plan, and you know what they do with it? They put it on the shelf. That doesn't help anybody. All you do is waste a lot of people's time. Your plan needs to be an active document. I mentioned that I had my group look at it at least once a month. I would look at it almost every day, especially those 5 or 6 key strategies, and ask myself, okay, where are we at with this strategy today? What can we get done today? And I'd run down and talk to somebody, hey, where are we at with this, blah, 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 blah. And it did 2 things. One, I stayed on top of those things, but also showed everybody that I was interested in this. The other reason you want to do this is at some point in time, especially if it's a tough year, everybody gets their praise when it's a great year. You exceeded your enrollment by 4%. Fantastic. That's that many more dollars the president can spend, and that's okay. That's okay. But when there's a tough year, and there's X number of dollars less, you want to make sure you had significant buy-in and ownership of what you were trying to do. You don't want to be standing there alone. Get everybody involved. Now, I happen to think the Vice President of Enrollment Management should take the heat. They're at top of the organization in enrollment management. But at the same time, you want to have the faculty understanding it so that when it does happen, you're not sitting there pointing fingers. You're pointing at, okay, let's start evolving this next strategic plan and how we can overcome this tough situation. Well, if you ever have the opportunity to hire a market research analyst, and you don't have money, I didn't have money, but if you ever do, think about that. And maybe maybe you're not going to hire a market research analyst, but one thing I always did was to make sure that I used to have an annual retreat with my top people, and the last question of the retreat was, what's the next position we need in our division? And the first time we did that, we said, market research analyst. And I turned around and I said, I'm not going to get new money for this. I mean, you know what that's like. We're not going to have new money. I don't care how many more students we bring in, we're not going to get new money for a position. But what we can do is when there's an opening in our division, we can assess whether or not we have to fill that position with the same function, skills, and everything that was there, or can we redesign it? And fortunately, I had some directors who were willing to give up positions once in a while if they thought they were going to benefit. They thought they could benefit. And we hired one. So the alternative to that is you have an opening, and let's just make it up. Let's say it's an admissions counselor you're going to hire. Maybe even a newbie, I mean, an entry level maybe. Maybe you sit back and say, okay, do we hire with the same skill set that we always have, or do we tweak it a little bit and look for somebody who might have some market analysis background? Maybe they graduated from a business school and they have a major in it or something, but maybe get that person on board and start tweaking them toward being your market research analyst. One of the things I did paid great dividends. I was fortunate I was at a research university, but I also worked at a school with 200 students, another school with 800 students, and another school with 2,000. So I understand small school, but I also understood the major research university. We had a business school, and if you all have a business school, or you're located in an area where there's a research university nearby that has a business school, I would really recommend rubbing shoulders with somebody who is familiar with doing econometric models, who might really be interested in designing something for you, maybe at no cost. In my case, it was the dean of the School of Business who came to me one day, and he said, Paul, let's do a linear programming model. I want to teach you linear programming. I never had a business class. I want to teach you linear programming because what you're paying those people all this money to do, you know, these consulting firms, these tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, we can do right here. And he taught me, you know, on a 2-month period, meeting every once in a while, he taught me linear programming to the point where I became the linear programming person. He could step away, and we literally could answer the question. For us, our faculty are always on, can't you increase the SATs? You know, big deal. But that's what they wanted. We could literally pinpoint how much one SAT point was going to cost. And so we would design these models and go forward. It would tell us if we gave this subgroup of students a $4,000 grant or a $3,500 grant, what the difference would be in the yield on that. And so if you have a business school or have access to, you know, maybe it's nothing more than a graduate student in a business school. My own daughter floored me one day when she works in an admissions office. She was a market research person in that admissions office, in addition to doing other admissions shorts. And I said to her one day, I don't understand why more enrollment managers don't go out there and learn linear programming. And I thought for sure, shoo, it was going to be right over her head. She said, Dad, when I took that MBA course, they taught us linear programming. I know all about it. And I thought, wow, that's something. So there are people out there. This is the little model I put together along with one of my colleagues. And we think this is a very important one because it's almost a step-by-step process. And this is, in the afternoon session, this is about where we're going to start and really go through this with samples and examples and all of that. And I'm going to run over this quickly, the 2-minute version. Obviously, every strategic plan should start with a mission of the institution. And again, that's where the president's vision and the trustee's vision, but the mission of the institution is there. And obviously, there are stakeholders. The most obvious stakeholder is you. But then there are other stakeholders, which I now hope you start to understand. The section in red is critical. Well, it's all critical. But this is where we start. This is where we start. It's the, where are we, the current position. And it's whatever data you accumulate. And again, I'm willing to bet in some cases you all have certain things, but in other cases every institution is different. So where we're at today, or this year, for example. Then you want to ask yourself about the internal environment. What is happening on campus that could impact enrollment down the road? Is there a new major? Is the College of Arts and Sciences talking about a new major 2-3 years down the road? An enrollment manager needs to see that and needs to understand that because that may be opportunities. Are there going to be some majors cut off? You better know that one too. You don't want to be selling English if you're no longer teaching English. I mean, it's just that kind of thing. Then you want to ask yourself about the external environment. What's happening out there? What's happening with federal regulations, state regulations, local regulations? And again, we're going to get into more detail on that this afternoon. What are the problems facing us? What are the problems facing us? You really need to ask yourself that question. And then, what are the constraints? The difference there is problems can sometimes be solved or worked through. Constraints can't. You know, if you've got on-campus housing for 625 students, you can't have 800 on-campus students. I mean, it's a constraint. So you have to work around that. How do you work with commuter students and do other things to enhance that? If you don't have enough physical facilities, well, that's a constraint. How do you work around that? So constraints have to be worked around. The forecast is, okay, if we don't do anything different, here's where we're at this year. And we do everything the same way, taking into consideration what's happening in the environment, internal and external, where do we expect to be this year? And again, well, we don't have time to pull that back out, but if you had 1,500 students last year, and then you had 1,300 students, and then you had 1,100 students, what's your forecast? I don't think it's going to be 1,300. It's probably going to be 900. So then you have to ask yourself the question, can we live with 900? No. So where do we need to be? Where do we need to be, and what's the difference? That's important to go through that forecasting model. That's an obvious one, but some of them aren't so obvious. Obviously, you're going to put your goals, your objectives, desired outcomes, strategies. That's where the action really is. And again, that's where we're going to spend more time this afternoon. The financial plan, can you afford those strategies? And if you can't, what do you cut out? How are you going to implement them? How are you going to assess them? And then it starts all over again the next year. So I have found that to be a useful tool. I hope you will too. Getting down the home run stretch here now. So enrollment planning, and this is from a book by Bean, needs to be institution-wide, but she's talking about institutional strategic planning. I'm talking about enrollment-specific market plan, but it needs to be somewhat institution-wide too. It needs to be dynamic, involve many departments at the table. They need to be at the table. You need to look at that internal and external environment, particularly the student markets, and effective strategic planning ought to have an enrollment management focus. This is a key one, I think. We hone down here toward a conclusion. Strategic planning can happen without enrollment management. But you know what? Enrollment management will not work without strategic planning. That's where it comes together. That's why you have to do it. I don't care if you're doing informal or extremely formal. You have to have that strategic planning. Many years ago, my last handout, I was intent on writing a book on the practical aspects of enrollment management. There are some theoretical books out there, and they're excellent. They're excellent. Again, I love Hostler's stuff. But I wanted to put together a very practical book on enrollment management. I never completed the book. Never had time. You know how that is? Never had time. However, I'd like to provide you with a draft of the chapter, and this was an early draft. I mean, grammar's probably terrible. There might be misspelling. I mean, it's just, but I thought I'd give that to you to take home and maybe glance through. It'll start to give you an idea of some of the specifics of the enrollment planning. And again, in the next session, we're going to get beyond talking about strategic planning. And then when I say next session, my next session this afternoon, and we're going to actually start doing it. And I'm going to actually, like I said, I'm going to have a sample one that you can actually take home. So if you want to use it, steal from it, use it as an outline, throw it in the garbage because you like another plan, that's okay. My emphasis here today is to get you thinking about strategic planning for the enrollment and market planning for the enrollment. I know I'm out of time. I got my little messenger here telling me. Are there any quick questions I can answer for you? What's a quiet group? Everybody must want to go to lunch. Oh, no, it's not lunchtime yet. Anything? Well, thank you. Oh, yes. I've not seen any. That's why I wanted to write it. I've not seen any. Now, some of the workshops you'll go to, you know, I don't know if you go to the college board meetings or the SEM meetings or ACRO meetings or something like that, NACAC. There may be presenters who hand out things, but I've not seen the practical book. But now you have something on strategic planning anyway. Thank you very much. I appreciate your having me.